Welcome back to another episode of Marvel Man 901. So today I'm gonna talk about Sabretooth, Night-Thrasher, Nova, Marvel Comics Presents featuring Shang-Chi and Batman. So I'm gonna start off with Sabretooth, whose real name is naturally Victor Creed. Now, we have seen him in two X-Men movies. The first movie being, of course, the first X-Men movie from the year 2000, and naturally the second one is X-Men Origins Wolverine from 2009. These two representations are fairly alright. I mean, some of them have the whole comic look to it, so in the first movie naturally, but I don't really like the fact that he's basically just a brainless thug who's basically fairly strong. However, in the second movie, X-Men Origins Wolverine, it's a lot better representation overall, actually, surprisingly so, actually, considering the fact that many of the other representations in this movie isn't exactly that good. Okay, so we're gonna talk about the character through the comics overall, actually, which is basically that his real name is naturally Victor Creed. He is from Canada. He has a lot of history with Wolverine, as both of them have almost the exact same powers, actually. I mean, a little bit different degrees and all that. Wolverine having the bone claws, while he himself has his finger claws or whatever. He was introduced in Iron Fist issue 14, and it was actually first introduced as basically just an Iron Fist villain, also fighting Luke Cage naturally when the two heroes basically work together. Later on, he did actually join the Marauders to fight alongside with the other Marauders naturally, and actually killing mutants in the tunnels, in the whole mutant massacre part, killing a lot of Morlocks basically. He was apparently trained by the Foreigner, which kind of somewhat explains at least his ability to kill just brutally. Naturally, he was also an ex-CIA agent, which some of the memories that Wolverine has basically points to basically started their whole feud. Apparently, Sabretooth actually killed someone that they were supposed to protect, which naturally caused some bad blood between them. And we can of course not forget the fact that he actually has a son with Mystique. The son's name is naturally Graydon Creed. So a lot more things naturally happened to Sabretooth, but most of my information is from the comics that I read, which is up to 1994. So I'm gonna continue now with Night-Thrasher issue 12 from 1994. Now this is the fifth part of Time and Time Again storyline, and basically the whole thing about this storyline is that the New Warriors, most of them anyway, are basically scattered around through time and alternate realities. Now Night-Thrasher ended up in basically slave colonial times, where he is actually having to fight some slavers in order to save a slave basically. He does however come to realization that he can't actually solve the slave problem, no matter how much he actually wants to do this. It's a bit of a tough pill to swallow, but he has to accept this basically. Okay, so another part in this issue is naturally with Silhouette, who's basically in Cambodia, back in time as well, but probably not as far back. She basically finds her evil grandmother called Tai, but when she was basically a 5-year-old kid. She's still just as evil and fairly powerful too. Basically, Silhouette stands between a choice here to basically just accept that her grandmother is what she is, or she can actually try to kill at least this child. Anyway, she actually throws Tai, the child Tai, into this basically power well. Apparently a place where Tai got her powers from or something like that. And hopefully this actually would kill this Tai anyway. She basically argues that this is probably just an alternate reality and the choices we make basically changes just this special timeline basically, probably not my own timeline. Anyway, the third story part here is about Chimera, naturally Namorita. She is also back in time, a little bit unclear though how far back, as she's basically working with two Atlantean oppositions. Basically one of them are more farmer people but still bloodthirsty, and the other part is naturally some barbarians, obviously bloodthirsty. So basically there's fighting between these two factors, and she decides to stop this once and for all, basically telling that you're of the same people, you need to work together to become great instead. Just a side note here, basically the Sphinx, the original Sphinx who actually caused this whole thing to happen, he is doing something to Egypt, which we will find out in the issue that I'm going to talk about right now, which will be Nova, volume 2, issue 7 from 1994. This is obviously the sixth part of Time and Time Again, and basically Nova is stuck in an alternate reality with another Nova, who is basically teaching him how to use his abilities that he gets through the helmet thing. Apparently this other Nova has basically taught himself how to do all this, and our Nova hasn't. Basically, Nova eventually actually manages to break through kind of a portal thing to get to his own reality, hopefully in a way. And meanwhile, Rage, back in time, in the slave colonial times as well actually, but in Africa instead, basically converses with some slavers about the whole situation here basically, and the slavers explain to him that the slaves that we get here are actually actually basically a soul to us from these tribes. Some of them are children that they can't actually afford to feed. Some of them are bad people who basically doesn't belong in their society anymore. And this is obviously also a tough pill to swallow, as naturally rage is all against slavery, naturally. I mean, who isn't, right? And the third part of this issue is Firestar basically conversing with a witch back in the Salem witch trials in, I think, the 1600s or something like that. Anyway, she basically convinces this witch to listen to her coven instead of basically taking matters into her own hands. And the coven says that they want to basically be a part of the humans, not to dominate them, or not to basically being enslaved or whatever, but basically just go their own way until things get better. Now we got to go back to real time basically, where the new warriors, basically just heroes who are somewhat new warrior type material, or having some discussions, or at least Cloak and Dagger having some discussions about the whole situation. And Cord basically stops them all, saying that something very odd is actually happening here. Egypt, apparently, is completely gone, which is obviously something that the Sphinx did in the previous issue that I talked about today. Okay, so we're gonna go to Marvel Comics Presents issue 158 from 1994. This is featuring Shang-Chi, and this is the last part of the Guantlet storyline. So basically Shang-Chi fights this guy called Lazarus, apparently an old villain who otherwise was known as the Night-Thrasher. So basically he fights him and defeats him, but before he does that he has to relive some bad memories when he is basically drugged by some kind of drug that Lazarus is using on him. Okay, so now we're gonna go to DC's Batman, actually with Detective Comics issue 600 from 1989. This is the third part of Blind Justice, and apparently in the previous two issues a lot of things actually happens. Bruce Wayne is basically being accused of being a communist spy, and considering the fact that things that happened to him in the past before he became Batman, and very sketchy things, basically him working with some bad people to become better at what he now is. Obviously, this causes some concern for people basically investigating him. Meanwhile, there's this new supervillain in town called Harbinger, who's basically using big, strong guys as puppets to do whatever he wants, obviously causing a lot of crimes and stuff like that, killing people and stuff. In the previous issues, Batman actually managed to get hold of one of these harnesses that apparently Harbinger used to basically control people. In Detective Comics issue 599, Batman, or Bruce Wayne, was actually shot by someone and was actually crippled because of this. Now in this issue, he is basically bound to a wheelchair and he can't actually continue being Batman as much, but he still needs to fight this Harbinger guy to actually stop this horrible thing that's going on. So his friend Roy Kane actually comes up with the whole idea when he finds out that Batman is actually Bruce Wayne, that Batman or Bruce can actually use the harness on him to basically dress him up as Batman and use him as Batman. Now there's obviously a big problem here, as Roy Kane is not even close to as trained as Batman is, so the body isn't even close to as strong as Batman's, but it will basically have to do. So eventually Roy Kane as, well, Batman as Roy Kane, or yeah, however you want to see it, basically finds the Harbinger guy, fights him, and comes out to basically chasing him down to a train track up in the air, basically monorail thing. Batman basically realizes that he can probably take over the puppet that Harbinger is using, because he knew who that was and apparently had accidentally done so earlier. So he decides to do this, and he basically, in the fight, a train comes behind Batman or Harbinger guy or whatever when Batman is taking him over, and naturally Roy doesn't believe that he is now Batman, so because Roy regains his consciousness, he basically fights Batman, gets injured and all that, and they both actually get hit by this train and fall down, and both bodies dies. So this actually ends with Batman still being fairly healthy considering. However, Roy Kane actually dies of this, which will eventually lead to Batman destroying the harness once and for all to make sure that nothing like this could ever happen again, and naturally feels awful. So that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed. All of this is Marvel's and DC's creations. I'm only telling the stories. Do subscribe and share this if you like this, and have a good day.